Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. 2 tickets, s'il vous plaît. Anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast. Okay, so chapter 29 then. I don't think there's masses to say here, actually. It's fairly straightforward and just procedural, but let's go ahead with this one then, chapter 29.
On the way to Edbury, I told Paddy that I had a friend from whom I could be sure of getting money, and suggested going straight into London rather than face another night in the Spike. But Paddy had not been in Edbury Spike recently, and tramp-like, he would not waste a night's free lodging. We arranged to go into London the next morning. I had only a halfpenny, but Paddy had 2 shillings, which would get us a bed each and a few cups of tea. The Edbury Spike did not differ much from the one at Rompton. The worst feature was that all tobacco was confiscated at the gate, and we were warned that any man caught smoking would be turned out at once. Under the Vagrancy Act, tramps can be prosecuted for smoking in the Spike. In fact, they can be prosecuted for almost anything, but the authorities generally save the trouble of a prosecution by turning disobedient men out of doors. There was no work to do, and the cells were fairly comfortable. We slept 2 in a cell, 1 up, 1 down, that is, 1 on a wooden shelf and 1 on the floor, with straw palliasses and plenty of blankets, dirty, but not verminous. The food was the same as at Rompton, except that we had tea instead of cocoa. One could get extra tea in the morning, as the tramp major was selling it at a halfpenny a mug, illicitly, no doubt. We were each given a hunk of bread and cheese to take away for our midday meal. When we got into London, we had 8 hours to kill before the lodging-houses opened. It is curious how one does not notice things. I had been in London innumerable times, and yet till that day I had never noticed one of the worst things about London, the fact that it costs money even to sit down. In Paris, if you had no money and could not find a public bench, you would sit on the pavement. Heaven knows what sitting on the pavement would lead to in London. Prison, probably. By 4 we had stood 5 hours, and our feet seemed red-hot from the hardness of the stones. We were hungry, having eaten our ration as soon as we left the Spike, and I was out of tobacco. It mattered less to Paddy, who picked up cigarette ends. We tried 2 churches and found them locked. Then we tried a public library, but there were no seats in it. As a last hope, Paddy suggested trying a Rowton house. By the rules, they would not let us in before 7, but we might slip in unnoticed. We walked up to the magnificent doorway. The Rowton houses really are magnificent, and very casually, trying to look like regular lodgers, began to stroll in. Instantly a man lounging in the doorway, a sharp-faced fellow, evidently in some position of authority, barred the way. "You men sleep here last night?" "No." "Then fuck off." We obeyed, and stood 2 more hours on the street corner. It was unpleasant, but it taught me not to use the expression street corner loafer, so I gained something from it. At 6, we went to a Salvation Army shelter. We could not book beds till 8, and it was not certain that there would be any vacant, but an official, who called us brother, let us in on condition that we paid for 2 cups of tea. The main hall of the shelter was a great whitewashed barn of a place, oppressively clean and bare, with no fires. 200 decentish, rather subdued-looking people were sitting packed on long wooden benches. 1 or 2 officers in uniform prowled up and down. On the wall were pictures of General Booth and notices prohibiting cooking, drinking, spitting, swearing, quarrelling, and gambling. As a specimen of these notices, here is one that I copied word for word.
Just before we get that notice, we've got the list of vices there that are prohibited, which just tells us the sort of behaviour that would go on in these sorts of places.
Any man found gambling or playing cards will be expelled and will not be admitted under any circumstances. A reward will be given for information leading to the discovery of such persons. The officers in charge appeal to all lodgers to assist them in keeping this hostel free from the detestable evil of gambling.
Is that hyperbolic, is it? The detestable evil of gambling? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's it makes you wonder where the priorities lay, really, if they sort of consider certain things to be that bad, and yet the conditions for the men and the women, although it seems mainly men, are so literally detestable.
Gambling or playing cards is a delightful phrase. To my eye, these Salvation Army shelters, though clean, are far drearier than the worst of the common lodging houses. There is such a hopelessness about some of the people there, decent, broken-down types, who have pawned their collars but are still trying for office jobs. Coming to a Salvation Army shelter, where it is at least clean, is their last clutch at respectability. At the next table to me were two foreigners, dressed in rags but manifestly gentlemen. They were playing chess verbally, not even writing down the moves. One of them was blind, and I heard them say that they had been saving up for a long time to buy a board, price £0.50, but could never manage it. Here and there were clerks out of work, pallid and moody. Among a group of them, a tall, thin, deadly pale young man was talking excitedly. He thumped his fist on the table and boasted in a strange, feverish style. When the officers were out of hearing, he broke into startling blasphemies. "I'll tell you what, boys, I'm going to get that job tomorrow. I'm not one of your bloody down-in-the-knee brigade. I can look after myself. Look at that fucking notice there. The Lord will provide a bloody lot he's ever provided me with. You don't catch me trusting to the fucking Lord. You leave it to me, boys. I'm going to get that job," etc., etc. I watched him, struck by the wild, agitated way in which he talked. He seemed hysterical, or perhaps a little drunk. An hour later I went into a small room, apart from the main hall, which was intended for reading. It had no books or papers in it, so few of the lodgers went there. As I opened the door, I saw the young clerk in there all alone. He was on his knees, praying. Before I shut the door again, I had time to see his face, and it looked agonized. Quite suddenly I realized from the expression of his face that he was starving. The charge for beds was 8p each. Paddy and I had 5p left, and we spent it at the bar, where food was cheap, though not so cheap as in some common lodging houses. The tea appeared to be made with tea dust, which I fancy had been given to the Salvation Army in charity, though they sold it at 3 halfpence a cup. It was foul stuff. At 10 o'clock an officer marched round the hall blowing a whistle.
That time reference there, the time marker, they're giving that sense of a day in the life, hour by hour account, and it really puts us in this position, such as the narrator, living these conditions with him.
Immediately everyone stood up. "What's this for?" I said to Paddy, astonished. "That means you have to go off to bed, and you has to look sharp about it too." Obediently as sheep, the whole 200 men trooped off to bed, under the command of the officers. The dormitory was a great attic, like a barrack room, with 60 or 70 beds in it. They were clean and tolerably comfortable, but very narrow and very close together, so that one breathed straight into one's neighbour's face. 2 officers slept in the room to see that there was no smoking and no talking after lights out. Paddy and I had scarcely a wink of sleep, for there was a man near us who had some nervous trouble, shell shock perhaps, which made him cry out, "Pip!" at irregular intervals. It was a loud, startling noise, something like the toot of a small motor horn. You never knew when it was coming, and it was a sure preventer of sleep. It appeared that Pip, as the others called him, slept regularly in the shelter, and he must have kept 10 or 20 people awake every night. He was an example of the kind of thing that prevents one from ever getting enough sleep when men are herded as they are in these lodging houses. At 7, another whistle blew, and the officers went round shaking those who did not get up at once.
So another time marker there for the same reason, just to give us that continuity of time, that chronology of the narrative.
Since then I have slept in a number of Salvation Army shelters, and found that, though the different houses vary a little, this semi-military discipline is the same in all of them. They are certainly cheap, but they are too like workhouses for my taste. In some of them there is even a compulsory religious service once or twice a week, which the lodgers must attend or leave the house. The fact is that the Salvation Army are so in the habit of thinking themselves a charitable body that they cannot even run a lodging house without making it stink of charity.
And that olfactory metaphor as well there, the stink of charity, playing on the senses of smell.
At 10, I went to B's office and asked him to lend me £1.
The time marker there for the same reason, that chronology, we're here taking every step with him as he goes through his journey and the desperate journey that he has.
He gave me £2 and told me to come again when necessary, so that Paddy and I were free of money troubles for a week at least.
Now in this next section we've got a range of proper nouns coming up. So Trafalgar Square, we've got the Strand. That might be it actually. But again, given that authenticity, there's real places. So we know these places, they're familiar with us, familiar to us rather, and we can imagine their journey along with him.
We loitered the day in Trafalgar Square, looking for a friend of Paddy's who never turned up, and at night went to a lodging house in a back alley near the Strand. The charge was 11p, but it was a dark, evil-smelling place, and a notorious haunt of the Nancy boys.
So more olfactory senses here, the evil-smelling place. Metaphorical as well, because things can't smell evil, but we understand what it means. It's a dead metaphor. We understand it just means awful, dreadful smelling place. And a notorious haunt, another metaphor there, the word haunt, of the Nancy boys, which is a slang term for the homosexual men.
Downstairs in the murky kitchen, 3 ambiguous-looking youths in smartish blue suits were sitting on a bench apart, ignored by the other lodgers. I suppose they were Nancy boys. They looked the same type as the Apache boys one sees in Paris, except that they wore no side whiskers. In front of the fire, a fully dressed man and a stark naked man were bargaining. They were newspaper sellers. The dressed man was selling his clothes to the naked man. He said, "Here you are, the best rig out you ever had. A tosharoon for the coat, 2 ogs for the trousers, 1 and a tanner for the boots, and a og for the cap and scarf. That's 7 bob. You got hope. I'll give you 1 and a tanner for the coat, a og for the trousers, and 2 ogs for the rest. That's 4 and a tanner. Take the whole lot for 5 and a tanner, chum. Right you are. Off with 'em. I've got to get out to sell my late edition." The clothed man stripped, and in 3 minutes their positions were reversed. The naked man dressed, and the other kilted with a sheet of the Daily Mail.
And that metaphor there, kilted, just seems to reinforce the easiness with which they switch roles and the sort of ease with which these kind of transactions take place, and perhaps the frequency as well of how these transactions, strange as they are, take place.
The dormitory was dark and close, with 15 beds in it. There was a horrible hot reek of urine so beastly that at first one tried to breathe in small, shallow puffs, not filling one's lungs to the bottom. As I lay down in bed, a man loomed out of the darkness, leant over me and began babbling in an educated, half-drunken voice.
Just before we hear him, the Eton boy, I think, Eton man, yeah. We've got more olfactory senses there, the horrible hot reek of urine. Lovely.
"An old public schoolboy, what?" He'd heard me say something to Paddy. "Don't meet many of the old school here. I'm an old Etonian, 20 years hence this weather and all that." He began to quaver out the Eton boating song, not untunefully. "Jolly boating weather, and a harvest." "Stop that fucking noise!" shouted several lodgers. "Low types," said the old Etonian. "Very low types. Funny sort of place for you and me, eh? Do you know what my friends say to me? They say, 'M, you are past redemption.' Quite true. I am past redemption. I've come down in the world, not like these fuckers here who couldn't come down if they tried.
It reminds me of Richard E. Grant's character in the fantastic film called With Neil and I. You really must watch it if you've not seen it before. It's a fantastic film. It's kind of perfect for the age that you're at now, probably, or maybe slightly older, but kind of, university freshers kind of age. It's absolutely perfect. It's called With Neil and I, and it's Richard E. Grant's first film. It's incredible, but he has a very similar voice and similar style, particularly with the taboo word. Now, the reference to the Etonian from Eton College, that's sort of a synecdoche also for privilege, isn't it? And he's from Eton, but it could be any public school really, and it represents the fact that he's come down such a long way from a position of privilege. So the Eton there is a synecdoche for privilege, I would say.
We chaps who have come down ought to hang together a bit. Youth will be still in our faces, you know. May I offer you a drink? He produced a bottle of cherry brandy, and at the same moment lost his balance and fell heavily across my legs. Paddy, who was undressing, pulled him upright. "Get back to your bed, you silly old cock." The old Etonian walked unsteadily to his bed and crawled under the sheets with all his clothes on, even his boots. Several times in the night I heard him murmuring, "You are past redemption," as though the phrase appealed to him. In the morning he was lying asleep, fully dressed, with the bottle clasped in his arms. He was a man of about 50, with a refined, worn face, and, curiously enough, quite fashionably dressed. It was queer to see his good patent leather shoes sticking out of that filthy bed. It occurred to me, too, that the cherry brandy must have cost the equivalent of a fortnight's lodging, so he could not have been seriously hard up. Perhaps he frequented common lodging-houses in search of the Nancy boys. The beds were not more than 2 feet apart.
There's litotes for us there. It's what it means is the beds were closer together than 2 feet apart, but by saying they were not more than, it's a backhanded way of saying they were very close together.
About midnight.
So just to explain that, I suppose the point of it, I guess, is that it seems polite. What he could say is that it was horrendous. The beds were even so close together it was untenable. But there's a sort of politeness here, I think, isn't there? And by using litotes, it gets the point across while still maintaining a passive sense of politeness.
I woke up to find that the man next to me was trying to steal the money from beneath my pillow. He was pretending to be asleep while he did it, sliding his hand under the pillow as gently as a rat. In the morning, I saw that...
Bit of zoomorphism there, isn't that simile? As gently as a rat.
He was a hunchback with long ape-like arms.
Oh, another one, ape-like.
I told Paddy about the attempted theft. He laughed and said, "Christ, you got to get used to that. These lodging houses is full of thieves. In some houses there's nothing safe but to sleep with all your clothes on. I seen him steal a wooden leg off of a cripple before now. Once I see a man, 14-stone man he was, come into a lodging house with £4.10. He puts it under his mattress. 'Now,' he says, 'any fucker that touches that money does it over my body,' he says. But they done him all the same. In the morning he woke up on the floor. 4 fellas had took his mattress by the corners and lifted him off as light as a feather. He never saw his £4.10 again."
A little bit like Charlie's stories from the Parisian section. We've got this sort of... There's a dark humour, isn't there, in these anecdotes of failure that we have here, and because we hear it through these voices, such as Paddy's voice, as lovely, that lovely Irish lilt that we have there, it makes it all the more real. And that's it for chapter 29. I'm going to call it a day there, and I'll come back to do chapter 30 another day, because it's got very late and I want to go to bed. So I will see you next time for chapter 30. Okay, bye for now.